The Sahara territory is not entirely covered with sand, but we perceive it as the epitome of a desert. Vast dunes, ridges, and occasional rocky formations. When examining old maps, it seems like pure fantasy: rivers, forests, and numerous unknown civilizations, all in what was once a flourishing Africa. But what could transform an entire green continent into this? Let's delve into it. Look at this photo. What do you think it is? Where do these huge green circles with vegetation suddenly appear in the desert? It's not Photoshop, and it's not such a rare occurrence. Wheat and other crops are actually grown right in the desert. But what if I tell you that once wheat grew naturally in Africa, and it was harvested several times a year? It's no secret that in the past, northern ancient Africa was a fertile region with many rivers crossing the current Sahara Desert territory, flowing into the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. But could medieval cartographers be mistaken, drawing this, or were they copying from an even older source? Let's find out. But back to Africa, as we all assume that there's nothing there now except sand, concealed beneath dunes and ridges. Yet, we are mistaken, as often we encounter plateaus with rocky desert landscapes like these, which are not just sand. Here, old unknown structures are even found. The entire eastern coast is crisscrossed with deltas, river channels, and lakes, all now dried up. But what was different recently is an indisputable fact. Flying in an airplane, one can see partially ruined clay huts built following the bends of these once fully flowing rivers. Not pyramids or monumental structures, just villages. And who, one might wonder, hindered building houses wherever necessary, let's say at the bottom of former riverbeds? The more observant might even notice dams, right in the desert. There's not much information about them online, but the dams reach up to 200 meters in length, pyramid-shaped in cross-section, and are clearly visible even from the height of an airplane. And it's not just one dam. If you open Google Maps, you can spot another dam, slightly to the east and 100 meters smaller. All of this in a radius of 300 kilometers without any civilization nearby, only isolated hotels. Strange, isn't it? Life has been absent here for a long time, but someone built these peculiar dams right in the middle of the desert. The question arises, for what purpose? Here, one should also remember old maps because once Africa was entirely green. I don't think it's the fantasy of cartographers of that time. Something clearly happened here, and vast spaces suddenly turned into sandy deserts overnight. If we pause to ask where so much sand in the Sahara comes from, we can reach some very interesting conclusions. According to our official science, the Sahara was once the bottom of a vast ancient ocean. Can you imagine? Even to this day, they find whale skeletons there. They even invented the age of the whale, and the ancient ocean has a name too. Let's delve into this fact. I have a question for the scientific community. Over 37 million years, what thickness of soil should accumulate over a whale skeleton before it is excavated? Officially, the average soil growth rate is 1 to 2 millimeters per year. So, over 37 million years, the skeleton should be at a depth of at least 37 kilometers. Even considering various erosions, washouts, rock expansions, and the uplift of the Earth's crust, with such an age, finding skeletons on the surface is impossible. However, surprisingly, they find skeletons, and genuine ones at that. This is evidence that there were no millions of years, everything happened not so long ago, as they write that even the contents of the stomachs of some specimens have been preserved. This means not everything is in the state of skeletons. There are also mummified remains, but, of course, they won't show us that. Another question is how whale skeletons ended up on the surface of the desert. Something massive and catastrophic wiped out all the fauna, the entire nature of the flourishing Sahara. Remember how petrified people were found in Pompeii? The reason there was simple: a global catastrophe. Now, take a closer look at archaeological findings. This is an aerial view of the desert and barely discernible tents of a small group of archaeologists conducting excavations. Looking at this photograph, it's hard to believe that a few thousand years ago, all of this was the Green Sahara. Here is a discovered skeleton, with the middle finger inexplicably found in the mouth. At the time of excavation, the temperature in this part of the Sahara Desert was plus 49 degrees Celsius, far from the temperature in the once green Sahara. All these findings are still guarded by the military. It's interesting how ancient sands can preserve our history to such an extent, and all of it is right on the surface, indicating not such a distant past. If you examine the map more closely, you start to wonder logically, where does all this sand come from? Besides the official version, the bottom of the ocean, there is another version. All this sand is the waste from the processing of underwater ores by some giant mechanisms, something like these. And here are a few photos from above. You can see that these are remnants of islands from an ancient surface. What happened to the rest of the territory? All the other soil was carried away by the flood when the wave passed through the continent. All the washed away soil is the sands of the Sahara. Soil, and rocks, washed away by water erosion, grain by grain. And in this place, there are traces of erosion like these, but they are parallel, as if carved by water streams. Maybe that's what it is. And here are some grooves going northeast. Of course, there could be various explanations for their formation, like the deposition of wind-eroded materials in porous layers. But on closer inspection, you can see that only water erosion could have created these grooves in the rock. And indeed, water from Africa hasn't disappeared anywhere. The Kufra region is a vivid example of how life in the desert can change when water appears. 50 years ago, before they started extracting water from the Nubian underground horizon, the Kufra oasis was a small settlement through which trade routes passed from the central part of the continent to the Mediterranean coast. Nobody expected water here at all, but with the help of equipment, they managed to find this ancient river system under the sands. Science is silent about these numerous craters, although they are larger than the Arizona crater, some even still have lakes in the center. Here is the map itself, indicating that there is plenty of water in the Sahara, but it is in underground seas and artesian aquifers. Gaddafi drilled wells and pumped water through huge concrete pipes, artificial rivers. In the lower left corner of the picture is a diagram of the underground seas of the entire North Africa. There is practically water everywhere underground in the Sahara. However, according to official data, global water reserves account for only 3% of the total amount, considering that water covers 2/3 of our planet. Freshwater is not distributed uniformly, so many countries do not experience a water shortage. But not Africa, covered with a thick layer of sand. In the 1950s, foreign geologists tried to find the most extensive oil deposits in Africa and, in parallel, discovered a huge amount of freshwater deep underground, which they called the Nubian Aquifer. The leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, became interested in the project and did everything possible to make this water available to the country's ordinary citizens. But in 2011, a civil war broke out in Libya, and Gaddafi himself was killed by rebels. This year is considered not only the death of the Libyan leader but also the end of the grand project, the Great Man-Made River, which was even included in the Guinness Book of Records and called the 8th wonder of the world. Gaddafi managed to find the key that would change everything. But he was quickly removed. I have long wanted to make a whole video about this. If you are interested, let me know in the comments. In Africa, it turns out there are still enough traces of a highly developed civilization. And as we have discovered together, it's not just the Egyptian pyramids, temples, and Sphinx. There are more global findings, like these. Gaddafi found the key that would change everything. But he was quickly removed. I have long wanted to make a whole video about this. If you are interested, let me know in the comments. In Africa, it turns out there are still enough traces of a highly developed civilization. And as we have discovered together, it's not just the Egyptian pyramids, temples, and Sphinx. There are more global findings, like these. That's what came out of the video. Share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel if you want to know your true past.